On this episode of Three Key Insights.
You built an amazing outfit.
We've been able to grow our business throughout these 20 years. So for me, as I think about the future, the tightrope really is, how do we continue to be Morgan Automotive, or the United States of Morgan, with all these extremely talented operators who kind of skin the cat differently and still pay attention to the desire of the consumer. That's I think the biggest challenge that we kind of face in the near term is, how do we recognize what makes us great, but also lean towards, a world that's forever transitioning.
The auto industry is moving fast, and it's getting more complex. Success today takes more than instinct, it takes insight. Welcome to Three Key Insights with Sanjiv Yajnik, President of Capital One Auto. Today, Sanjiv sits down with Brett Morgan, CEO of Morgan Automotive Group, home to more than 70 rooftops. Sanjiv and Brett break down what it takes to grow your business without losing performance and what dealers can do to take the lead.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm here with Brett Morgan. Brett is an inspirational leader and one of the towering figures in the world of auto and of dealerships. In fact, he's the owner and the creator of one of the largest privately held dealership groups in the United States. I am super excited about speaking with you because, Brett, you've really built this amazing auto group from the ground up. And what I'm really interested in is picking your brain and finding out what are the key insights. But before we go there, Brett, can you just talk a little bit about your background and how you came into this job, having been a TV executive producer? I mean, that I talk about building ships and coming into finance, but that is like a huge change. So just give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, maybe not as fascinating as your background. And again, the Morgan story really is there is a family story here. I'm the son, and like you, kind of obsessed with entrepreneurs because I had a back seat to my father. I would consider Morgan kind of like his third real big run in entrepreneurship. The first was when I grew up, he was in the independent tire and auto service business. He was the youngest, I think, regional vice president for Bridgestone Firestone. And then he went to work for a family and he helped them grow their business from 3 retail to 160. And then he went into business for himself. And, when I was a young person, my dad used to, say things like they were catchphrases, but they caught on. And unfortunately now I repeat them to my daughter and she has to hear them all the time. But, things like, if it is to be, it is up to me, success comes in cans, not cannots, we had it was all about making it happen. And he had sold his business Tires Plus when I was in college. And when I graduated, I kind of just went and chased a passion of mine. So I worked for an ABC radio affiliate and Fox Sports affiliate in Richmond, where I'd gone to school. And then I think Larry had retired for like 2 weeks and called me up and said, I'm going to invest into a car dealership as a minority investor. And it wasn't until about a year later and several more phone calls, I came down and sold cars for his majority partner and began to learn the business. And, it was great in the sense that, had I transitioned directly from college into dad's business, it wouldn't have really felt like I had much in the creation of the business. Whereas because, I joined him even before we had our own, our first dealership, it really does feel like something that we've done together.
One of the great things about you is, you're a great leader, but you also have a lot of humility, and just like you did right now, you kind of deflect off much of your success in different directions, whether it's your team or your family. And clearly you have an inspirational dad who's instilled so much in you. Can you talk about some of your leadership principles that you believe have helped in building this amazing organization that you've built?
So a lot of our principles that we pounded in the early days, they're people oriented. So they're things like, I'd say a couple of our 10 commandments would be that no one's entitled to let a good person leave the business. So if there's an employee who wants to leave, maybe it's for another opportunity. Maybe it's because the store that they're in cannot promote them. They're not allowed to let them go until Larry and I talk to them. And, this has been something that we practiced even when I was still selling cars. I would jump off the floor and meet with, an employee who maybe had reached the ceiling or, or didn't see the opportunity in their current position that they wanted to see in life. Secondly, we tell our operators they're not allowed to go to bed at night if they know that they've got an upset customer or a customer issue that's unresolved. Right, wrong, or indifferent, we still handle a lot of our business the same way we did with one store, with 75. Now, I could probably write a book on time management and how the way I view time has changed in going from handling what that noise looks like at a 3 or 5 store basis versus 75. But Larry and I are still extremely accessible from both an employee or a customer perspective. We say it all the time. It's all people. The dealership business is fascinating because it's a very detail oriented business. And I think you've seen historically, there's been many who have tried to kind of commandeer that full control of that dealership from a corporate perspective. And they end up kind of throwing out a lot of the entrepreneurial values that make those enterprises great. We have partners in our store like Terry Taylor, but we don't have them in every store like Terry Taylor does. We even like our operators that frankly aren't partners to feel like it's a partnership. We want them to feel like it's their store and that at the end of the day, they're ultimately not only accountable for the financial results, but for the well-being of their employees and their customers as well. And yeah, that's
I just
really,
want to, yeah, I think that is really powerful, Brett. I know that you have talked about a couple of things in the past. There's on the leadership front, you've talked about the no ego rule. And then you've also talked about vulnerability in leadership, about the internal 5-year-old in every CEO. You want to talk a little bit about those two things?
yeah, I'm a huge, I don't want to say fan of psychology, but I've gone through some certain things in my life personally that have brought so much emotional maturity to me. And I've always kind of understood the benefit of kind of understanding the psychology in the management of people. But, people are very complex, especially as we mature and get older. And I really do put a high priority, and especially someone who's kind of cut my teeth in a family business, of having a higher level of emotional maturity. I can remember as a young leader having some of the pitfalls that a lot of young leaders have, right? We want what we want. We want it now. Don't, do as I say, do it now. I had a almost like militant, part of me as a young leader. And it was hard to also let it go when people wouldn't get on the bus. I took it personally. And, it was tough to navigate some of those early years, especially when I became a general manager and was running my own store. And, you know, for me now, kind of seeing where I've been able to go, I want to bring other people along. A lot of times we just see the behavior and we see the external effect that, and the same thing is true in parenting, that we kind of miss, where the real fire to put out is. And I think that, as much time as you spend as a leader in a car store with your personnel and your people, that you shouldn't just be in the dealership business, you should be in the people growth business. And again, I don't have all of the answers, but since I was in my teenage years, I have been fascinated, captivated. I feel like I'm always picking up a book and trying to understand better the relationship between, our lives, especially as young people, and the psychology involved, and how it brings us to be as adults, and it can create things that are either healthy or non-healthy. And I think it's given me a capacity to handle some really difficult situations with some of our leaders that has ultimately made Morgan a better place, and it's made my life more peaceful, fulfilling, and rewarding.
One of the really important traits of any great entrepreneur and great leader has always been the way they think about people is not just talent in this standpoint of what is your technical skills and what do I do, but really diving into what makes a person tick, what makes you tick, teaching that, teaching humility, teaching vulnerability, but then using that as a platform to do amazing things. Now, one of the things that you also really drive is a relentless discipline in operations. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, where did that come from and how relentless is that in your 75, rooftop stores?
I think we can argue there are times where it's too relentless. We're students of this business. Even though we're 20 years into this business, we still don't know what we don't know, and we're still learning. But when we were early to this business, we used things like NCM 20 groups, in various, seminars and meetings to really network and gravitate towards having a better understand of our business. And we've been lucky enough to meet some really outstanding operators. Florida's full of them. All of our stores just happen to be in Florida, of really good dealer operators. But we were keen early on. We wanted to know who the best of the best were and what made them the best. And it was this kind of relentless pursuit of being at the top of the KPI stack. And we do rate ourselves. We have a monthly report where we pit all of our KPIs against the publics. And, historically, we've always done very well. So I think the first step is you need to know where you are from a business perspective, have the ability to get real-time analytics out of your business, but also understand and be able to define what a good job is. And, we've kind of, joke that in the early days, we had a report for the report for the report. And whether our people opened them or not, we just have always been 100% transparent. And, even today, our operators can see the financial statements of their peers, every item line, so, and there's some probably, a little good and bad, a little a give and take that comes with that. But I think being transparent, there's a lot of dealer operators, and they're not trying to keep their people dumb. They're probably afraid that it'll invite problems, and they're not as transparent, right? Or they don't let that information bleed down any further than the general leader. And I think they're doing their organization a disservice. So I think the first is to have really good, accounting and analytics. And the second is to have, a great deal of transparency. The third is to define what a good job is. And then we just pound that rock. And, I just, say that sometimes we are so persistent. If we've got an operator that's falling short on a KPI, they've got to be able to stomach, that, that critique, that insight, because it's coming at them daily. And
Yeah.
again, just always been open-minded and made really, really good relationships with great operators. And when you have that level of humility that says you don't have all the answers, what are they doing? That can create a really uniquely good environment at times.
If I just connect some dots here, because I worked in many industries, and you talk about operational effectiveness and really driving that even to a fault. You grew through acquisitions, but more recently you're focused on very high quality acquisitions. You're
Yes.
paying more for intangibles than
Yes.
you've ever done before. And that's a pretty massive change. And that's a strategic kind of a shift. So, how do you think about that? What role does strategy play, and what is the defensive strategy? If that's not revealing too much of your kind of secret sauce, what is the thinking behind that?
I almost want to make an acquisition joke here, Sanjeev, and say that if you think that we paid up for some of those intangibles, you should see what the others are paying currently. It's wild out there. And for the right brand, I had a call from a dealer friend who's a dear friend, and hopefully he'll watch this. He's one of the smartest operators that I know. And I'll call him when I'm lost on something, and he's terrific, but he's building a very good sized business, and he's only been at it for a few years on his own. And we were trying to reverse engineer in our heads an opportunity that he has, and it didn't make any good near-term business sense. But both of us could look out 4 or 5 years and construct a very optimistic universe where this was the right move. So I think, for us at Morgan, we've always been long-term players, and this is, people ask us all the time, and it used to bother me, employees and people in our industry. Well, what's the game here? What are you guys doing? When are you going public? How many rooftops when you go public? When are you going to sell? When are you going to do this? And look, we have capital partners, and we've gone through different iterations. And in fact, we have, the greatest capital partners. We're the second only private to go through a bond raise in automotive, but we're always looking, long term. And I think when you do, you can see some of these acquisitions a little differently, than somebody who might be looking, almost like private equity looks at investment, or, somebody who's just got a shorter term clock, or who wants to, take advantage of, how, specific brands are treated. And acquisitions get really dicey, especially in a market where revenue is stagnant or moving backwards, which is kind of the environment that we're in today. But to get you back to your point, in the beginning, we looked at every acquisition as it came to us on a one by one basis. We didn't have kind of a one size fits all thesis for buying or what we liked. We just looked at them all for what they were, and then kind of made a grade and decided, was it a business that we'd like to have? As Warren Buffett likes to say, that's a business I'd like to have. But over time, I think what we've realized is when you can have really powerful operations from a volume perspective. And I think post-COVID, Sanjeev, what I've noticed too is there's been more volatility in brand equity. And what I mean by that, there's winners and losers on the OE side. And some of that's because of, the disruption of Tesla and Lucid and Rivian and some of the direct to consumer options. The consumers never maybe had more choice. So for us, when you can have, a brand that's got the right trajectory in a market that can do a lot of business, then things get really exciting. And we've always said the smaller stores are the hardest. And I ran one of those, but the smaller volume stores are always the hardest to operate.
It's kind of interesting you say that, because they're the hardest to operate, and you have to put the same amount of effort, maybe more effort, in running a small store than a big store, and you get these scale benefits and things. But for a dealership that is going to start up, is the high quality business a luxury that comes later? So do you have to start with something that has to make money and that's pretty cheap that you acquire, and then down the road you can then have the luxury of thinking about something that is, that is higher value, but you're paying more for the intangibles?
Yeah, I would think so. But if I was talking to somebody who had their first store, or was looking to invest in their first store, I think the one piece of advice I'd give them is to understand the fixed operations, the service and parts business. It's the highest frequency of touch that you have with your customer. And again, I think, look, when the economy's good, people still need vehicle service and maintenance and repair. And when the economy's bad, they still need vehicle service, maintenance, and repair. And we've seen how world events, even what we're going through now, our new car business is a little softer than we'd like, but we are heavily reliant right now on our pre-owned business, which is relatively healthy at this time, and our service and parts business. And I would tell anyone who's newer to automotive, the quicker that they can understand the power of running a good fixed business, your F&I, your finance and insurance, your warranty business, and your fixed operations are your insurance. That's your rainy day fund for if things ever really get dicey out there, because the first place that we see that typically suffers is your new car sales.
Yeah. I love, this is one of your basic philosophies, which is F&I and the products that you sell along with the car. But very importantly, when you talk about full absorption and the fixed thing, what you're really talking about is your servicing business. And one of the great innovative things that you've driven, Brett, is a mobile servicing business that has become a powerhouse in your dealership.
I was just going to say, and it's a compliment to you, we probably look at that mobile service opportunity in the same way that you do your technology stack at Capital One. It's the way that you can stay ahead of what other people are offering in the marketplace who might have on the surface of things a competitive offering. If you can, make things more convenient for the customer, if you always put customer convenience at the forefront, we think on the service side, eventually they'll pay for it, meaning they'll pay a premium for a premium experience. We're still early goings there, but there are just dealers that don't believe in it. And I think about it within your technology stack. You're at every corner making it extremely easy for consumers to engage and transact and to get information and to find the right vehicle. And I think for us, we really want to use that mobile service as a way to retain our customers, stay in front of them by bringing the dealership to them.
Yeah, you've really leveraged technology. Being an engineer and coming into auto and loving what I saw in dealerships and having a great belief in dealerships and the service that y'all provide, I've always felt that dealers are at the center of the car buying journey and that customers benefit tremendously. So my mission in life, ever since I took over and created the new Capital One Auto, was really to serve the dealerships. And I've spent over $1 billion building the Navigator platform and giving it to dealers first for free and then for a very low price because I want dealers to succeed. And so everything that we built, Dealer Navigator, the tools, Protect ID, because we want y'all to succeed. But let me ask you, if you pull way up from all the things we talked about, and I know that all the dealers and listening to this are going to be massively inspired, what are the top 3 things you picked up in your major success? What would the 3 insights, the key insights be?
Well, I think I think number 1 would be people first. And, we've all learned that from our chairman, who's somebody who really is enriched. His life is enriched by watching others become successful. And I think in today's day and age, people crave that rather than some stale corporate situation. Just like you have that care and passion for dealers, people need to feel that. Now, I say at our size, we can have that for our leadership teams, but it's really, if it's going to bleed down, it's really up to all those leaders to have that same passion for their people. So I would say, number one, people first. And I would say, two is, on the analytics side, we drive a lot of custom reporting through Power BI now. And that's usually when we need to aggregate data from multiple sources. But, make sure you have a good handle on your data flow and are able to deliver that in real time to your operators and define what a good job is. There's so many, I think in so many parts of our business that we just look at the end result. I think about it like on the e-commerce side. You might just have an operator, he's fixated on close rate. But really where the battle's won and lost is in your engagement rate, your contact rate. So you need to be swimming way further upstream because that's really where you're winning or losing the battle. So making sure that you're focusing on the right data points, the right places in your business. And I would say number three, so, people, data, and really I would say number three is, to never rest on your laurels, keep a strong network, the dealership community. I've met some fascinating people and I learned from all of them. And I'm grateful to have that. We've done a much better job, I'd say, of making outstanding relationships with fellow dealers than we have anyone else on the spectrum, whether that's, manufacturer reps or vendors. We've just made some fantastic relationships in the dealer body. And time again, that's been so beneficial. So for us, being a good community partner isn't just about sponsoring the local Little League team. Or being a good community person is also about, looking beyond the walls of your dealerships and your employees and making sure that you're, supporting your fellow dealers. And I think that that's come back to benefit us time and time again.
I love that. Brett, thank you so much for spending the time. It's amazing. I know you're a really, really busy person with an amazing business to run, but I think this is going to be great for other aspiring dealers and newcomers to hear from your wisdom and get inspired. So thank you so much.
And I just want to say, again, I'm reminded of your heart and passion for the entrepreneur, the dealer, and I appreciate your support. Your tools, it wasn't lost on me. A dealer with one rooftop can compete on the surface of things as well as a dealer with 12 rooftops with your tools. And, I think that's beautiful. And I think that, having a level playing field that can't be bought or acquired into in our business is healthy and helps keep our business honest. And, but I just appreciate you having that respect and appreciation for entrepreneurs. There's people who want to see car dealers go away. I hop on Reddit from time to time. Like I said, I have a lot of self-awareness. I know what they mean, and I take that to heart. But there's also so much good that dealers drive that people aren't cognizant of. So thank you for giving me a little bit of a platform to talk about it.
This has been 3 Key Insights with Sanjiv Yajnik. Now let's turn those insights into action and take the lead. We'll see you next time. The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Capital One Auto, Capital One, NA, or its affiliates. This content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to serve as financial, legal, tax, or business advice. Viewers should consult their own independent professionals regarding their specific individual or business needs.